Hi, and welcome to Get Curious with Kirsten, where we talk about the intersection of curiosity and leadership. I want to show you this adorable mug that my husband gave me recently because it ties into our Get Curious theme. It has an image of Ted Lasso, who is the main character in the Apple TV show Ted Lasso, and it's a great show if you haven't seen it. It's heartwarming, uplifting, and it's got great lessons about leadership. And in the show, Ted quotes Walt Whitman, who said, "Be curious, not judgmental." So we're going to keep that in mind as we talk about the theme this week, which is about staying curious during periods of silence. How can we do this? When we're in a conversation, there's a tendency for many of us to avoid silence. It makes us uncomfortable. So we want to close that gap, and we'll step in often by speaking. And I know I do that myself. But even more specifically, I'd like to answer this question that someone posed recently about silence. They said, how can I stop from jumping into silence with my own preconceived notion of what the other person's thinking? I think the key phrase here is preconceived, because that leads me to believe you're coming to a conclusion or judgment about what the other person's thinking. So let's slow it down and unpack what's really happening in a situation like this. As the person is speaking, you're probably listening to two things: the words that they're actually saying that you're hearing, and the running stream of thoughts that's going on in your own mind. In order to be an effective listener, it's important to be aware of the thoughts that continue to pass through our own minds so we can separate them out from what we're really hearing that person say. So how can we become more aware of the thoughts in our own mind? By practicing mindfulness on a regular basis. And that's a way of stepping outside of ourselves as if we were an objective third-party watcher or listener. So I think about it as watching the thinker in my own mind. And it's really a form of meditation. And the more often you're able to observe your own thoughts when you're alone by yourself in a meditation practice, the more aware of your internal thoughts that you're having during a conversation with another person. So for example, in my head right now, I'm thinking, I really hope I don't make one of those weird scrunchy faces, so I have to re-record this video. So normally I wouldn't say that out loud, but I'm just aware that's a thought that I'm having right now. So we all have these thoughts, and this constantly is happening in the background. But how aware are we that we're actually having these thoughts? In coaching school, we were taught to listen to both the words that our clients use, but also the meaning that our clients attach to those words. So I'd like to use an example to illustrate this concept. If I were in a conversation with someone and they said to me, "It feels like I'm walking on a tightrope," and then they get silent, it's very tempting for me to apply my own meaning to what they said. So personally, I have an unpleasant association with tightrope walking. So I conclude in my mind, tightrope walking is something to avoid. So I might jump in and say in that moment, "Oh, that must be awful." That's my way of acknowledging what I heard. But if you notice, I didn't really acknowledge what I heard when I said, "Oh, that must be awful." I acknowledged the meaning that I applied to what I heard. So if we could slow this down again, you could actually break down and see the flow of thoughts that occurred in my head. Tightrope equals unpleasant equals avoided at all costs equals me saying the words, "Oh, that must be awful." But what would happen if I noticed in that moment that I was starting to form a judgment in my mind? And instead, I got curious and said, what does walking on a tightrope feel like for you? I might be really surprised when they say, "Exhilarating," or "It feels like I'm holding a lot of tension in my body." In which case, the conversation would go in an entirely different direction than it would have if I had jumped in there and said, "Oh, that must be awful." So you see the difference? See what an impact that the decision that I have and how I respond can really shift the trajectory of the conversation. So the next time you have a preconceived notion about what the other person is thinking or want to jump into that silence, I encourage you to follow Ted Lasso's motto, which is be curious, not judgmental. And next week, we'll talk about curiosity and silence, but from a different angle. We'll talk about the stories that we make up in the silence and why it's therefore important for us to over-communicate as a leader. Until next time, stay curious.